Welcome to ESG Decoded. Today, we're shifting the climate conversation towards something that doesn't get nearly enough attention, but has the potential to drive some of the fastest, most meaningful climate impact available right now: superpollutants. You've likely heard a lot about carbon dioxide, and for good reason. But gases like methane, nitrous oxide, and refrigerants are significantly more potent, hence the name superpollutants. And yet they remain underrepresented in mainstream climate discussions, business strategies, and public awareness. So the question is, why? And more importantly, what can we do about it? In this exclusive ESG Decoded video episode, we're bringing together a range of perspectives, from scientists and climate experts to industry leaders, corporate decision makers, and policy voices, to connect the dots and challenge how we think. You'll hear a series of focused conversations, each offering a different lens on the same challenge. How do we accelerate practical, scalable solutions that already exist? And what will it take to move from conversation to action? Let's get into it. Welcome to ESG Decoded, the podcast where we unpack how business, innovation, and impact intersect to shape a sustainable future. I'm Erica Schiller, one of the ESG Decoded hosts and Chief Development Officer at ClimeCo. I'm joined by two leading climate scientists who bring complementary perspectives in today's conversation. Dr. Gabrielle Dreyfus is Chief Scientist at the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development, IGSD, and an internationally recognized expert on methane and climate superpollutants. She collaborates with leading scientists around the world to advance climate science and policy and serves on scientific advisory panels for the United Nations, the Environment Programme's Climate Clean Air Coalition, and the Montreal Protocol. Dr. Dreyfus also chairs the U.S. National Academy's 2024 study on atmospheric methane removal. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Dr. Alyssa Acco, Senior Climate Scientist at Spark Climate Solutions. An applied climate scientist and science communicator, Alyssa works at the intersection of science and action, helping governments, businesses, and other decision makers identify high-impact opportunities to slow near-term warming. She is a lead author for the Working Group 1 of the IPCC's 7th Assessment Report, which is coming next week, right? And is widely recognized for translating complex science into practical, actionable solutions. Welcome, Dr. Acco.
Hello.
So let's start out talking about this, super pollutant topic from the science perspective. I really appreciate you both joining us. When most people think about climate change, they think about carbon dioxide or CO2. But carbon dioxide is only part of the story. We're going to talk about climate pollutants that often receive less attention, despite having an outsized impact on near-term warming. So this question is for you both. When you hear the term superpollutants, what comes to mind, and why should people be paying more attention to them?
When I hear the term superpollutants, I immediately think of the other half of warming. Because when we look at all the drivers of today's climate change, which is warming the planet, around half of the warming is actually coming from these non-carbon dioxide pollutants called superpollutants. And they consist of things like methane and tropospheric ozone and nitrous oxide. And so when I hear superpollutants, I think the other half of warming. But not a lot of other people know that they actually account for half of today's warming.
Wow.
And for me, superpollutants, I think speed and urgency. And that because when we're thinking about global impacts today from climate change, we need to be thinking about superpollutants when we think about what to do.
I love that. So, Dr. Dreyfus, why do you think superpollutants have remained largely absent from the mainstream climate conversations?
So I've been studying climate change for a long enough time. And when I was first studying it, climate change was something that was talked about as happening in the future.
Mm.
And that when we think about the future, and I studied ice core records, deep time, from a geological perspective, it makes a lot of sense to focus on CO2 because it's, as Dr. Alco is saying, half of warming is due to CO2, and it builds up in the atmosphere. And any emissions in CO2 really lock us into a future climate debt. But today, climate change is out the window. It's all around us. It's like these record-breaking heat waves that just happened in Western Europe, and I'm here in Washington, D.C., and just sweated through a pretty intense, hot and humid extreme. And that superpollutants really, and in this context, there's really great urgency to tap the brake on warming. We're already experiencing a lot of warming, and it's having negative impacts. And so cutting superpollutants like methane is one of the fastest ways that we know to tap that brake.
Helpful. Dr. Oko, why is it important or I should say Dr. Akko, why is it important for both policymakers and businesses to broaden the climate conversation beyond carbon dioxide?
So if we only address carbon dioxide, we can be missing a lot of other opportunities to further drive down warming, especially because we have numerous strategies that are already available to do so, and many of which are largely cost effective. So in a world where every increment of warming matters, we can't afford to not pull all the levers available. And at the same time, it will take some time to see benefits of our actions to reduce carbon dioxide for several reasons. And we're already seeing devastating consequences of warming across the globe, which Dr. Dreyfus just mentioned. So because superpollutants, most of them are short-lived, this means that they act fast. And so reducing them is an important complement to carbon dioxide action so that we can also drive down warming in the near term in addition to the long term.
Yes. Before we discuss solutions, it's important to understand what superpollutants are and why they've become such an important focus for climate scientists. Although they receive less attention than carbon dioxide, their impact on near-term warming is significant, as you both have stated. So, Dr. Dreyfus, what exactly are superpollutants and how do they differ from carbon dioxide?
So superpollutants are a set of atmospheric pollutants that have climate effects greater than carbon dioxide and also can have environmental and human health effects. More specifically, the ones that we tend to focus on include methane. And when I say methane, think natural gas, cow burps, and landfill gas. Tropospheric ozone. And so this is the ozone that is close to us that we breathe in smog. Hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, these are the gases and fluid actually that makes your refrigerator and air conditioner work. And so we have experience with those. And nitrous oxide is laughing gas, but in the context of climate change, it's mainly a byproduct of using too much nitrogen fertilizer and also some industrial waste gas. And finally, there's also black carbon, which is incomplete combustion. It's that kind of sooty stuff that comes from diesel engines, for example.
Yeah, thank you. And Dr. Akko, why are methane and other superpollutants considered such powerful levers for reducing near-term warming?
So there are three reasons why superpollutants are really powerful for reducing near-term warming. The first is that most of them are short-lived. This means that their impact in the atmosphere right now, which we talked about is around half of today's warming, is mostly from recent emissions over the past couple of decades at most. And so the moment we stop replenishing the atmosphere with their emissions, we can start eliminating that warming impact. And that's very specific to short-lived climate forcers, which many superpollutants are, and carbon dioxide does not work that way. Carbon dioxide is a long-lived greenhouse gas, and so it takes a while for carbon dioxide's impact to decrease. So that's one reason. The second reason is that a lot of our actions to reduce superpollutants don't also reduce other pollutants that can cool the climate, because we emit all sorts of gases and particles into the atmosphere, and some of them cool the planet. But when we reduce most of the superpollutants, then we're just reducing their warming impacts, and we're not offsetting it with also reducing some cooling impacts, which is what we can see with carbon dioxide, where we can close a coal plant, for example, and that will reduce CO2, but it will also reduce some sulfur dioxide, which cools the planet. And the third reason is that we have so many solutions available right now to reduce superpollutants. And so they can be implemented almost immediately, and they can also be fast acting when they're implemented. And so the combination of all these things is what makes superpollutants such a powerful lever for reducing near-term warming.
Yeah. So, Dr. Dreyfus, beyond climate change, what other benefits come from reducing superpollutants?
So a lot of superpollutants are not just capturing heat, greenhouse gases, or particles that absorb heat. They are also air pollutants. And we know that polluted air, especially air that has higher levels of tropospheric ozone, that smog, and black carbon, makes people sick and actually also contributes to millions of extra deaths each year. So clearing up that smog and black carbon could reduce the incidence of heart attacks, asthma, pulmonary disease, and even dementia. And so this is a big deal in terms of not just that fast impact on slowing warming, but also improved air quality would help with health, and also plants don't like air pollution. So reducing those air pollutants would also improve crop productivity. In addition, in the case of nitrous oxide, it's not just a greenhouse gas, but it actually also destroys the ozone layer. Now that I'm talking about the stratospheric ozone, which is at the level that's above where commercial airplanes fly, and that is essentially the sunscreen for the planet. And nitrous oxide is one of the last ozone depleting substances that humans contribute to increasing the amount of. That's not controlled by the Montreal Protocol, which is this amazing treaty that has put the ozone layer on track to recovery. And so if we were to reduce nitrous oxide emissions, we would also protect the ozone layer and that UV shield and have climate benefits. So superpollutants, you get there. There are multiple reasons that we should care about reducing superpollutant emissions.
Yeah, that's great. I love to hear the human health piece. That's very cool. So why is it important to think about timing when evaluating different climate solutions, Dr. Acko?
So different climate solutions can act over different periods of time. I think one thing that's very clear is that the earlier we act on any climate pollutant, the better off we will be.
Definitely.
But we have to acknowledge that some of our actions are going to take some time, like the energy transition. Changing our systems to have more clean energy and wean ourselves off of fossil fuel is a process that's going to take time across the world. And so that's an example of something where we need to start now, but we need to understand that it takes time to do that. Another element of time here is what we've been talking about with these short-lived climate forcers, which many of the superpollutants are, like methane and ozone and black carbon and HFCs, in that the moment we implement actions to reduce them, they can have a benefit on the climate. And so they are fast acting in that sense, which is really powerful and important. Whereas some, but not all, of our carbon dioxide measures could also take some time, even when they're implemented, to see benefits from them, like some of the coal plants that I discussed earlier. And so timing is really important to think about. We want to limit warming, as fast as soon as we can, but also we want to stabilize climate in the long term. So we need to be thinking about all these different things we can do starting now, but to address warming both in the coming decades and also for generations to come.
Yes. Yeah. Let's talk about awareness. So, despite decades of scientific research and growing evidence, superpollutants remain relatively unfamiliar outside of the climate community. Obviously, not to you both. So, why hasn't this issue become part of the mainstream climate solution conversation? Dr. Dreyfus, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about superpollutants?
So first one is that a lot of superpollutants are short-lived, and there is a confusion that short-lived means short-term in terms of impact. And there's this idea that we don't need to pay attention to superpollutants because they're short-lived. And the point is, if we don't pay attention to them and continue emitting them, then they will continue to give impact, right? So that's a first one, that you can't just assume that they will go away on their own if we don't do something about it. A second one is that there's this idea that we can't walk and chew gum, and that we can't both work on CO2 and superpollutants at the same time. But there are actually plenty of examples where the two strategies are completely complementary. And I can think, for example, about electric vehicles replacing diesel cars in Europe. I was in London maybe 10 years ago when there were tons of diesel cars. I remember blowing my nose, looking at the tissue and being like, ew, that's black. That's nasty. And as Europe and London has really switched to EV-friendly policies, I was there a few months ago and blew my nose, and it was not black. So those kinds of really fast benefits that people can see and experience really can provide support for climate policy. And with EVs, as you clean up the air, as you remove that black carbon and soot and the tropospheric ozone precursors, because of the EVs, as you also transition to low carbon electricity generation, you also get that benefit of transport decarbonization. So these really are complementary, can be mutually reinforcing. But another really important one that I want to touch on, especially for people in the ESG community, is the use of the 100-year global warming potential. And this is a default when people are using carbon dioxide equivalents. People aren't even really thinking about what that means. And that using a 100-year global warming potential will underestimate the contribution to superpollutant mitigation over the next 20 years when they're, for example, when they're the most potent. Mm-hmm. And that means that to where we started with Dr. Akko, it really obscures the fact that superpollutants are responsible for half of today's warming if we're thinking 100 years out, which really dilutes their impact. I mean, we're here in 2026, we're talking about 2126, whereas I really care about, 2050, even 2030. And so this fast way to slow warming from these superpollutants, we lose track if we don't really think about the kinds of metrics and how we're quantifying impact and what timescales are implicitly built into them. And so this is where these some alternative accounting approaches that are being proposed, like using radiative forcing or like actually looking at the temperature impact over time, because emissions matter, but emissions are a proxy for the impact. What we care about is the impact. And so it's really important to think about the pollutants themselves and to think about what it is that we actually are trying to solve for, and that is reducing warming impact and also health impacts in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I mean, these carbon markets aren't necessarily quantifying the carbon, the human health benefits of these carbon accounting activities. So there's definitely co-benefits, you could say, for those superpollutant abatement projects. Dr. Akko, how has the scientific understanding of superpollutants evolved over the past decade?
It's evolved quite a bit, and I would say a lot of it is policy relevant science. We've been studying superpollutants for decades and decades. I think the early 1970s started to understand atmospheric chemistry dynamics and how all of these different emitted compounds interact with one another. For example, a lot of superpollutants are chemically reactive in the atmosphere. So we've been building up scientific knowledge for a very long time. But I think over the past decade, we've seen a lot of advancements in terms of our ability to understand how to take action on them and to reduce their emissions and what that impact would have. So one thing that I've seen over the past 10 years is our ability to attribute their emissions to temperature change. And this, like Dr. Dreyfus was just saying, enables us to move away from these simplified metrics that aren't really quantifying their role in current warming or even warming at any point in the future. It's just using emissions as a proxy for us specified fixed time period, we're able now to look at their warming contribution to today's warming. We couldn't do that 10 years ago. We didn't have that information available. We had it in terms of radiative forcing. It's a little bit different. It's not as lay friendly. And so that's where the other half of warming even comes from, our ability to be able to quantify that. Some other things that we've been able to work on are the sectoral contributions to all the superpollutant emissions, how much each sector is contributing and what they emit. Our inventories are getting better. Our attribution methods are getting better to be able to understand, okay, overall, we have this much methane, but where is it actually coming from? We've also seen improved tools and methods for monitoring emissions, like satellites and also just handheld instruments and instruments on aircrafts to really understand where the emissions are coming from in the context of methane from natural gas systems. Solving that problem can be as easy as just finding it. But we didn't have the technology before to find it and to know where it was. But once we know where it's coming from, we could tighten a valve and fix our leak, for example. So we have better monitoring tools. We also have better evaluation tools, simplified models that are more accessible to different companies and different governments that we're seeing start to use those models. So we don't have to rely again on these simplified metrics that can be misleading. So there's been a tremendous progress. I will say there definitely are some challenges that scientists are still working on. We still have large and growing emission sources like livestock methane from the cow burps. That's really hard to reduce when you have cows that are just living out on pastures in parts of the world like India, for example. So we're still working on innovations to reduce those emissions. Same as nitrous oxide from fertilizer is another challenge that we're working on solutions for. And then there are emerging sources of superpollutants like rising emissions from natural systems that are reacting to a warmer planet. So permafrost or wetlands that can release more methane into the atmosphere, for example. So scientists are actively studying that to get a sense of the magnitude of the problem and if there are any mitigation opportunities to reduce those emissions as well.
Like atmospheric methane removal.
Yeah, future goals. I think it's really great to hear about that progress. Now let's look ahead. The encouraging news is that many of the technologies needed to reduce superpollutants already exist. The challenge now is expanding their adoption, which is what we'll discuss in our next conversation. So, Dr. Dreyfus, what gives you optimism about the future of superpollutant action?
So last month, when London was going through its heat wave, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, he talked about London's calling, no London's cooking. But in that same speech, he issued a global call to action on methane. And he highlighted the urgency and speed that methane action can deliver, and really also importantly, the need to move beyond voluntary action to really eliminate methane pollution and draw on the inspiration of the success of the Montreal Protocol. And so I just want to highlight here that this is the 10th anniversary of the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. It was agreed in 2016. And that treaty is a real reminder of what's possible. Not only has it put the ozone layer back on track to heal, but in this last decade, the Kigali Amendment took on HFCs, one of the superpollutants we talked about at the beginning. And by taking that on, this treaty is going to avoid up to 0.5 degree of warming by the end of the century. And that's really significant. And it's that kind of progress and that kind of example to build on that is where I get my optimism.
Love that. And Dr. Akko, what's one thing you hope listeners will take away from today's conversation?
So I hope that listeners remember that superpollutants are the other half of warming and come away recognizing that this is an opportunity because we have so many available solutions to reduce superpollutants and they're contributing so much to today's warming and they're fast acting the moment we start reducing their emissions. This is an opportunity for us to drive down further warming in the near term. It is not a substitute for essential carbon dioxide emissions. We were talking about the importance of timing earlier, and CO2, because it lasts so long in the atmosphere, builds up over time. So we really want to prevent CO2 from getting into the atmosphere, and that will really determine the overall extent of warming. And that's crucial. We can't distract from that. But at the same time, superpollutant action is an important complement, and it will enable a much safer climate and cleaner air, especially in the coming decades. But as long as we keep driving down those emissions, we will continue to see benefits well after a couple of decades. And this will have tremendous benefits for the world. We will save millions of lives, we will save tens of millions of tons of crops, and we will reduce the ever-growing risks of extreme weather events that really wreak havoc on everything they touch. So superpollutants is an opportunity that we cannot afford to miss.
Thank you both for your perspectives. We're joined by two Climeco leaders who bring deep commercial experience developing and implementing high-impact climate solutions, leveraging carbon markets to drive action. Derek Six is Chief Operating Officer at Climeco and has spent more than 2 decades working in environmental markets and offset policy. He has helped develop some of the earliest U.S. ozone-depleting substance, or ODS, destruction projects, and has played a leading role in advancing high-integrity environmental markets. Joining him is Allison Tyndall, Director of Industrial Innovations at Climeco. Allison leads global decarbonization efforts across hard-to-abate industries, including chemicals and cement, and is recognized for her expertise in superpollutant abatement and industrial innovation. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so we've heard why superpollutants matter from the scientific perspective, and now let's talk about the solutions and what can be done about them today. Derek, you've been involved in environmental markets and helped develop some of the earliest ODS destruction protocols in the United States. What first drew you to this work?
I was totally unaware of the CFC ODS destruction opportunity, the problem, until we were approached back in the Chicago Climate Exchange days in 2008 by the US EPA. And the EPA came and highlighted a real hole in policy. The Montreal Protocol had been passed. CFCs and HCFCs were on schedule to be phased out. And that's terrific. It was forcing over time a transition away from high GWP and ODS materials. But there was no incentive to properly dispose of them. There was no regulation to destroy these materials. And so all of these millions and millions and millions of pounds of CFCs that we'd produced in the United States, you had to recover them, but they were perceived as a liability by the industry. So there was little incentive to properly treat them and none to get rid of them. And the question was, could we develop an ODS destruction protocol that incentivized getting rid of these materials so that they could never be emitted into the atmosphere? And that was an exciting, someone coming to us with a policy problem the carbon markets could solve. That really enticed me.
Yeah, that's really cool. So the science tells us that these pollutants matter, but what does reducing them actually look like in practice? Let's take a closer look at how superpollutant projects move from concept to implementation. One superpollutant that we've mentioned is ODS, another is N2O. So Allison, can you share how N2O abatement projects work and why they're an important climate solution?
Sure, I'd love to. So N2O, or nitrous oxide, as we know, is a superpollutant, and it's emitted as a byproduct in the production of a lot of the products we use every day, like fertilizers, chemicals, personal care goods. So we can't stop using these, but what we can do is look at where the source of the superpollutant is, and we can install in some of these large facilities or chemical plants, we can install something similar to a catalytic converter on a car and actually prevent and chemically destroy that N2O right at the source, preventing it from ever leaving the atmosphere. So that's really exciting that we can do that, and we can use chemistry to prevent these from being emitted right at the source.
Yeah, that's great. So we're destroying N2O, we're destroying ODS. But Derek, tell us more about ODS destruction projects. They've become one of the most established superpollutant project type. What makes them so impactful?
I think they check a major box that's really important for the carbon markets. So, so often there's a tendency for people to look at and diligence and potentially criticize individual types of voluntary projects. Um, but I think that's the wrong way and the wrong goal to put on carbon markets. So the reason that ODS projects have been wildly successful is that they really caused a revolution in practice change across the HVAC market, across reclaimers and the recovery of refrigerants in the United States. And the way that happens is by putting a stable and a reliable pricing signal on an activity or an action, right? We said, hey, we don't want this stuff to leak out, and I'll pay you to make sure that it doesn't. Well, that pricing signal, in particular with ODS projects, was so effective at getting to everyone in the industry over the years. And so we've seen HVAC companies change their recovery practices. We've seen people not mixing refrigerants, which ends up creating a very low value, tank of something that no one wants, and it's just a liability. If we keep them separate, that's a best practice. It's incentivized appliance recyclers to figure out ways to tilt the machine when they recover the refrigerants to maximize the recovery. And they didn't used to do that. They wanted to minimize the recovery because it was a liability to have this gas. So now that pricing signal, now that R12 has a value in the marketplace, if it's recovered and responsibly destroyed, people know this, it gets out, and they change the way they behave. And I think that's a real goal of carbon markets is to really scale kind of practice change across an industry, across society.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Allison, what surprises people most when they learn how these superpollutant projects are developed and implemented?
Apart from being maybe slightly uncharismatic, some of these projects, right? Derek's described going and finding tanks somewhere in a back garage, maybe. I know I've hyped up a few stories of a large chemical plant. They may not be picture perfect carbon projects, but they have an immense and supersized impact. And I think that's what can be surprising. We often talk in carbon, but some of these projects can have just multiples of the impact of carbon alone. So, for example, N2O is 273 times worse for the environment than carbon dioxide alone. And so I think that's the first surprise is just the scale of the impact of these projects. And then the second one is these are immediately addressable problems through these projects. And the result is permanent chemical destruction in some of these destruction projects for ODS or N2O in this case. You can permanently destroy that at the source, and it's irreversible because it's a chemical reaction. So that's often something that's shocking is the immediacy, the permanence, and that irreversibility. And also the piece that kind of stands out for a lot of folks is, while they may not look the prettiest, they tend to look really great on ratings. Because when you look at these, that permanence, the additionality piece of these projects receives really highly rated project scores, as well as things like the CCP certification from the ICDCM. So we see these really high integrity, maybe not the best looking projects that are having real permanent irreversible results. And that tends to surprise some folks.
Yeah, that core carbon principles label is definitely indication of the quality, the additionality, the permanence of those types of projects. And we love to see it. So let's talk about scale. If technologies exist today, the question becomes what's keeping them from being adopted more broadly? Allison, what do you think is preventing broader deployment across industries and facilities?
I mean, there's always a few things that prevent scaling of anything. But in this case, some of these technologies really require specialized knowledge, and they're also high cost. In the case of N2O abatement projects, these are very, very large reactors. We're not talking small handheld. These can be 10 feet across or larger. And so these are large facilities, large upfront capital expenditures, large costs to operate. But on top of that, it requires the expertise to do this properly and safely. And it requires a community of catalyst suppliers and technology providers and monitoring and verification to happen in order for these projects to get off the ground. And that's just expertise that maybe isn't commonplace around the world. And so what I love to see is, yes, these technologies exist, but then I love seeing the markets come in and enable that scale to happen by rolling out that technology, by allowing those companies to get over that hump of the initial investment and to keep these projects funded, but also to keep training folks on how we implement these highly technical projects and expand the knowledge globally.
Yeah, I think the other piece as a industrial operator you might consider is, look, I have this facility, I'm creating a product. Do I need to shut down to install this new abatement equipment? How's that going to impact my operations? Do I have the trained employees? So I think that training piece is really key. Derek, can you share what progress you've seen over the past decade that gives you confidence that we're moving in the right direction?
Well, I think it's a mixed report card. And so, again,
Fair.
I'm going to talk about ODS as a huge success story because of the practice change that it's caused in the industry. But it had the benefit of being supported by a compliance regime in the California cap and trade program, cap and invest program, and having that reliable pricing signal. And so, if I do an ODS project, I have pretty good certainty that I can sell those credits and pay for the project that I've just undertaken. And I think when we look across some of our other superpollutant projects at Climeco, our adipic acid projects, our N2O projects, in some cases, we've been very lucky to have long-term financial support from buyers who are interested in supporting that project type. But we need more of a market pricing signal. There's great opportunity to expand the number of N2O projects globally. We know how to do it. We have willing facilities, I think, that would implement it, but they really need the pricing and the support. The CapEx expenditure, as Allison said up front, is extremely high, and not without a great deal of operational risk, as you indicated, Erica. So we're kind of waiting for the markets and the pricing signal and the demand to catch up with what's possible here, which is a bit frustrating as someone at Climeco who really sees climate change as an urgent problem. You know, we're at the starting line, ready to go, kind of waiting for the gun in some cases.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And also pushing, right? I think we're talking to new industries and manufacturers to say, hey, we think this is an opportunity. Let us help you make it happen. So, moving to the end of this segment, really appreciate you both contributing and sharing your perspectives. But let's talk about looking ahead. As momentum continues to build, the opportunity shifts from proving these technologies and solutions to scaling them worldwide. Allison, can you share what opportunities excite you the most for the future of industrial innovation and superpollutant abatement?
I think the fact that we're having this conversation around superpollutants is exciting. This was a conversation that wouldn't have happened maybe even 6 months to a year ago. And so I love that this superpollutants word, is really elevating awareness, knowledge, discussions, attention, not just here, but globally. We saw huge announcements and dialogues at London Climate Week. There's a lot happening in the world, and it's starting to focus that lens on this really critical near-term action that we can take with these superpollutants. So that has me excited, just the fact that I get to say the word superpollutants way more during the day than I ever used to. I could have a tick every time I say it now, which is great news for the planet and for kind of everyone involved. But the piece that I'm really starting to see is the pendulum for a while had shifted a bit into the removal space, which is a necessary space, but we're starting to see that come back to a bit more of a balanced portfolio approach. So looking at, yes, long-term removals, but also what can be done in the near term, in the short term, to take action now while we continue to develop out those technologies, while we continue to develop that project portfolio. And so we're starting to see that balanced approach from the market, and that's what's really enabling this superpollutant action to start now. Because a lot of these are short-lived or long-lived, right? N2O is a long-lived climate pollutant. It's in the atmosphere for 120 years. So taking action today has really, really long-lived impact, which is exciting. So excited to see that balanced portfolio approach come back. Really pumped to hear that the dialogue is being had around these projects. And I think we're going to see a lot more coming out around these super pollutant projects. Folks are starting to understand what can be done here and the fact that we can take action today.
Derek, what gives you optimism about the future of super pollutant action?
Boy, I 100% agree with what Allison was saying about the pendulum. I would again stress that there was a focus on removals for the last maybe 5 years in our market, and I think people are hopefully recognizing the urgency of the moment and the sort of scalability and rapid deployability and the instantaneous almost impact that these super pollutant projects can have. So I'm optimistic that things are shifting to, as you said, Allison, I like that wording, a more balanced portfolio, a more balanced approach. Maybe I recall a time we used to call it an all of the above solution or approach. So yeah, great optimism about people becoming more aware of the super pollutant opportunities.
Love to see it. All right, so now we're joined by Michelle Jolly. She is the Director of Sustainability Solutions and Services at Amazon. In this role, her team launched the Amazon Sustainability Exchange, a free public website that democratizes access to Amazon's and other companies' sustainability technology, science, and other proven solutions to accelerate collective action. She also leads the Carbon Credit Service, which allows companies in Amazon's value chain to purchase the same carbon credits that Amazon uses, further scaling climate solutions. Beyond her corporate roles, Michelle is a passionate advocate for the arts, having co-founded the Los Angeles Contemporary Dance Company. That's so cool. I'm so glad we're adding that. So now we're going to talk about the business perspective, Michelle. Can you share with us, from your perspective, where do super pollutants fit into the broader climate and sustainability priorities that companies are managing today?
Yeah, Erica, thank you so much for having me and driving this discussion. We share a passion with Climeco about this space. And super pollutants show up in a lot of different ways in Amazon's operations. And so we start with understanding where they show up across our grocery business, our refrigeration, our chill chain, our HVAC, and our thousands of buildings that we have around the world. And so they fit into first understanding how they are represented in our footprint and driving, the first priority of measurement and driving efficiency across them. So we have a brilliant buildings team that works on the way that we measure that across the diversity of building types that we have, be it a grocery store or a fulfillment center or any other type of building that we operate. And then working with some of our OEMs and HVAC providers to make sure that we're driving innovation in some of the use of super pollutants within the refrigerants in our operations. And so we spend a lot of time on our own operations, but then we also spend a bunch of time thinking about outside of our operations and outside of our value chain, how do we drive reductions in those really potent greenhouse gases? And so the two spaces that we, think about for those are refrigerant destruction, which are for the refrigerant types that have been outlawed from being added into production, but we work with partners to find those and to destroy them so that they're not canisters leaking into the ozone. I can also speak a little bit about the rice that we invest in too, but we think about it in those two ways. Where within our operations should we be managing them and driving efficiencies in how they show up in our footprint? And then also outside of our operations, where can we have an impact in reducing the impact they have?
Yeah, that's nice. And also understanding how super pollutants fit into your value chain. So if you wanted to match that footprint.
Yeah. So the credits can be, when we do the outside of our operations, and we generate credits. What's really cool about super pollutants is they can show up as either an offset or an inset, depending on how you're using them. And so for the refrigerant destruction, those are mostly used as neutralization credits. But for rice methane, those can also be used as insets.
Yeah, that's cool. Since you have the whole foods chain, is that how you're using them as insets?
Yeah, we have
Nice.
a large grocery business in Whole Foods, and then we also have a number of suppliers that are interested in them as insets, given their egg footprints and rice impact.
Mm. So, what makes super pollutant reductions compelling from a business perspective?
They have this really nice place in our portfolio of our market-based mechanisms because of their outsized impact, because of how super they are, which is actually means that they're really bad. They're super bad. And
Powerful,
so,
yeah.
yeah, exactly, from their outsized impact they have and the global warming that they have. And so we see them fitting in as this complementary piece around the immediacy of the impact they can have when you have these interventions alongside some of our longer term interventions like driving nature-based removals or technological carbon removal, that has a nice complementary piece in our solutions that we're investing in to make sure that we're focused on both the immediacy of things that need to happen and the impact on the atmosphere, as well as driving solutions to scale over decades.
Mm. Okay, so you're kind of matching. How do conversations around climate action evolve when you point to immediate reductions rather than those long-term future benefits?
Yeah, I mean, we were just in London last week for London Climate Action Week, and you could not ignore the need to have an immediate impact on global warming. Right? It was over 95 degrees in London, and half the buildings weren't, having the cooling equipment required to make people comfortable. And so, when we start to talk about the higher global warming potential of these gases and the impact we can
Hmm.
have in a handful of years versus the time horizon or other projects that take a long time, trees to grow and things like that, that gets our leadership and our teams really excited about the immediate impact we can have when we invest in these projects and how there's not, for many of the segments we're investing in, the solutions are proven. We know how to do this. We know how to destroy a refrigerant canister. We know that there's an approach to alternate wetting and drying for rice methane. And it's really exciting when we're able to say that some of that invention risk that is necessary in other places is less so. And you get this like kind of outsized impact and a quick turn on these investments.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, we've seen a lot of positive impacts on super pollutants, and really the driver is there demand to participate in these markets? Is there demand to produce more credits to which by destroying or preventing
Mm-hmm.
these super pollutants from going into the atmosphere? Um, so, what signals are helping companies gain confidence in taking action on emerging climate priorities like super pollutants?
Yeah, I think that confidence is a really key part. And it is one of the hurdles that we hear from companies who are looking to potentially join us in this work. And the places where you can find confidence is in the rigor of the standards we use. And so we have a science team that looks at when we're going into rice methane, we say, what are the existing standards in this space? What do we like about them? And being really open. We operate a website called the Sustainability Exchange where we publish what we call approach documents to these segments, where we're really open around here's the things we love about the methodologies, here's the opportunities and the challenges that still exist. Instead of trying to make it seem like everything's just tied up in a bow and there's not one corner of risk anywhere, we say we still want some more rigor in these pieces. Here's some challenging elements of the way that the samples are taken and the existing methodology, for example, in rice methane. And so we will look at the existing methodology, say what full open transparency, what do we like and what's challenging? And sometimes we'll say, let's add a little bit more requirements on this with our project developer. Let's take
Hmm.
the existing standard and then say we also want to see these 3 or 4 other things. We don't want it to be a random example. We need the samples for the rice methane in those chambers to be in the project area. And that's a requirement of this offtake that we're taking with you. And that helps other companies with the confidence to participate when they know that we've kind of pulled every thread on the existing methodologies and that we're challenging them and not just taking them as, well, that's the best we can do. And looking at how we can always make them better and be open around the risks. Because I think when you're open about it, it doesn't have this kind of, what don't I know? It takes some of the fear and ambiguity out of it for a lot of other companies to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that transparency builds trust, and it's brave to do that, to say, look, we know that there are risks. We're laying them out there, but we think it's worth the risk to participate and demonstrate climate action.
Yeah, and some of the companies we talk to, the challenges that they have on some of these credits are it varies a lot company by company. Some companies like refrigerant destruction because they can wrap their minds around the zero, permanence risk. Like that canister once destroyed in a certified
Yeah.
facility is not going to find its way back together like a sci-fi movie. Like it's destroyed.
Yeah.
Versus others really resonate with the impact on farmers of the alternate wetting and drying and the reduction in 30% less water used on average for those projects. And so it's finding what are companies accessibility point to some of these with the confidence and then also the storytelling that resonates with the nature of their operation and what segments they're choosing to participate in.
Yeah. Can you share how does, you mentioned scientific credibility in terms of looking at the methodologies, but what about ratings, third party validations? There's kind of different labels and quality standards. How do you leverage those as well?
Yeah, we think that the ICBCM core carbon principles plays a really important role in looking at methodologies. So it's many layers. When I talk to companies who aren't familiar with this space, it's always using a third party methodology so that you have an independent verifier who's doing all the rigor of the measure, verifying, and reporting on the project. It's the ICBCM, which looks at the methodologies and reviews them and says this one meets core carbon principles or does not. And so we really value that piece of it, and that is a great simplifier for companies who are not able to spend the depth that maybe we do in this space. And so we think they play a really important role. And then, we spoke about transparency earlier, and the registries also play that really important role, right? In terms of like making sure that there's no double counting, that there's the rigor of, who's actually in possession and who's the retiree of a given credit. And so all those, when I started in this space, it was an intimidating alphabet soup of all the different ratings agencies and registries and all of that. But they really, when you put that together, it has this really nice um, set of voices and independent verifiers and transparency that is really great to support the companies who are stepping in for the first time and want to understand, how do I know this truly represents an equivalent ton of carbon.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I guess looking ahead, so how are you seeing a shift from setting climate goals to now demonstrating measurable progress towards those goals?
Yeah, I've only been in the sustainability field for 4 years, but I jumped into the deep end as chief of staff to our CSO, and it has changed a lot in the last few years, right? And there's so many companies with commitments. There's over 600 companies in the climate pledge that have committed to net zero by 2040 or sooner, and we are hearing from them. And to join that community, you have to have your CEO sign that letter, right? Which I think is a brilliant way that team approaches it, because you have to say, like, we understand at the highest levels what this commitment means. But the shift is coming to, especially it's mid 2026, and there's a lot of 2030 companies out there. And I've spent a lot of time talking to them around in the 2040s to say, you may think that it's all the time in the world before you have to start sourcing some of these things, but it's actually moments, and it will go so quickly to understand how you approach this space, what segments resonate with you, what challenges or education are you going to need to have with multiple layers within your organization as you begin your procurement strategy. And so what I'm starting to see is that build the pipes is the thing I always say, is to help tell companies how much you put through it, you still have to build the same pipes. And so figuring out, when does that procurement start and how do you participate alongside your decarbonization? It's not a substitute. It's not something you do day one, but for most, they find out that it's sooner than you think, that you need to start looking at what this means for your organization and how that will resonate with not just your internal leadership, but your stakeholders, your investors, your customers, your suppliers. And that takes some time and some iteration to explore what that might look like for an organization. And so I'm seeing companies shift from, setting those goals to saying what, the obvious piece of how does their operation evolve and decarbonize, but then what does this solution strategy look like? And how does it not just have this, ledger component in the net zero, but also this like storytelling and impact that you can have that can resonate pretty closely alongside your industry.
And, we talked about 2030 goals. So if we look over the next 5 years, we're in 2031. How do you see corporate sustainability strategies evolving in that time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the sustainability strategies in corporates is going to continue to kind of reach across those stakeholders, right? I get asked a lot around, the why, and we were, our commitment to co-found the Climate Pledge in 2019 and to bring these companies into it, was about drawing a line and having a North Star, and that's multi decades long, and in the next 5 years. Um, we'll look back on that chapter of so many companies setting targets and talking about how does this provide business value. And I think that's going to be one of the most compelling things is how claims evolve and how these credits are used against a product, a service, or a footprint, depending on where the company is in their journey. I'm working with a number of the customers in the credit service around what we think is high integrity demand use cases. And I'm really excited to see some of those evolve in the next 5 years. Instead of using credits as penance for high carbon activities, attaching them to low carbon activities, such as a lower carbon building or a more sustainable product on Amazon.com, and figuring out how that drives the attachment of these science critical solutions driving business value. And if we can do that, then I think it's going to have a really great compounding effect on the impact that these solutions can have.
Oh, I'd love to see that. And I really appreciate your enthusiasm for this future and also
We're trying.
shaping it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned you've just been in the sustainability space for the last 4 years. You've clearly learned a lot, grown a lot. What advice would you give to sustainability leaders who are trying to build internal support for new climate initiatives? And what do you wish you would have known at the start of exploring superpollutants?
Yeah, on the first part, I've been at Amazon for 15 years though, so I'm newer to sustainability, but I know this company pretty well. I started as an intern 16 years ago. And so the advice I give to sustainability professionals is make it work for your company's culture and industry. So Amazon's an engineering company. We're technology, we love efficiency, we love entrepreneurship. And so when we think about some of our work in this space, it's about, driving things to scale. It's about driving efficiency and, using market-based mechanisms in a way that helps with supply and demand. That really resonates with our leadership. And so for other sustainability leaders, figure out what that hook is. If you're a food and beverage company, some of the water impact of some of these solutions alongside the climate impact, it can be really exciting. Some of the human impact in reductions in deforestation that carbon revenue helps communities build desks in schools and maternity wards, and that might resonate. And so finding the angle where it can resonate with your company culture and all the other goals and missions and objectives of the company can really start to make it feel native to what you're doing versus this like new thing that feels so much further outside of what you're doing. And then on what I wish I knew or learned before going into super pollutants is, you think you know a lot about carbon and all of a sudden you're looking at CO2 equivalents and the outsized impact they have. And I learn every time I go to an event about another flavor of super pollutants that are out there. And so I think, starting high level and looking across the landscape, because it's a huge, broad field of these, gases and the different impacts they can have and where they show up in your emissions or, geographically, where they're having an impact. And so I would say, stay higher level sooner and look across the landscape and decide, what makes the most sense for your company based on what's out there and your company's appetite for how much you want to help raise the bar or define something in a segment versus, in the spectrum, starting with something that is a more in a rinse and repeat with a standard that's very well socialized and adopted across many companies. That's a whole spectrum, and you get to decide where you want to play in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. I think there's definitely folks who are going to be early in their climate journey that are not going to say we're going to, raise the bar on the scientific standard of this methodology. I think they
Totally.
just wouldn't have the depth for
Yeah,
that.
totally.
But leveraging the rating agencies and the Integrity Council for the voluntary carbon markets, their core carbon principles label, and those other pieces to really lean on the experts. But I really appreciate you sharing this business perspective today, Michelle, and your experience at Amazon. I think it's been super valuable.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
For this perspective, we're joined by Kristen Gorgonpour. She's the Senior Vice President at the Climate Action Reserve. Kristen oversees protocol development and registry operations that support environmental markets and climate programs, bringing a unique regulatory perspective on the market signals, incentives, and collaboration needed to scale action on superpollutants. For some additional context, I'm going to share a bit about the Climate Action Reserve, also known as CAR. Founded in California in 2001, the Climate Action Reserve is a leading nonprofit carbon registry that ensures transparency, integrity, and environmental benefit in carbon markets. Climate Action Reserve now operates in many international jurisdictions, supporting both compliance carbon markets like California and Washington State, and voluntary markets around the world, from US and Mexico to Chile and China. In January of 2026, CAR announced an impressive milestone: 250 million tons of carbon credits issued since its founding. What an incredible climate impact. Thank you, CAR and Kristen, for your work.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to talk about this topic today.
Great. Me too. So, Climate Action Reserve has worked on superpollutant methodologies for years. What initially led CAR to dedicate resources to this topic?
Yeah, really great question. So I really think this goes back to like who we are as an organization. And what we're really trying to do is create significant impact with our work and thinking about what are the fastest opportunities that we can kind of look at to really create that meaningful like climate benefit. And so I think when we're looking at the area of like super pollutants, it kind of provides us that opportunity. So when we're thinking about things like, landfill projects, nitric acid production, ozone depleting substances, there we can really generate meaningful, significant impact. And so like we tend to kind of want to focus on those protocols and methodologies. I think another key component of like the reserve's work is really, we're really focused on high integrity like protocols. And so when we think about super pollutants and these like project types, they really lend themselves to rigorous accounting because we have a lot of like direct measurement. And so when we kind of look at the combination of, being able to develop methodologies that are rigorous, and then combined with like the impact, it's like a really compelling area for us to work in. And that's kind of why we've been focused there.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So CAR has developed methodologies for methane and other superpollutants, as you just mentioned. What have you learned from working directly with project developers and stakeholders in this space?
Yes, we've been in this space and working in the area of superpollutants, starting with methane since 2008. So really, that's like nearly 2 decades of experience, like working on these like methodologies and implementation. And I think one thing that the reserve does really well is really, engagement with our stakeholders, whether it's like project developers, like verification bodies, other stakeholders, such as like, government. And through this work or this time period, we've really been able to kind of ask questions of what can be improved, what's working, how can we streamline our protocols while still kind of maintaining that like high level of integrity.
It's kind of where like the rubber meets the road and kind of looking at all the projects that are coming through. So that's really allowed us to like continue to like refine the protocols. And through that work, it really increases that rigor of like the protocols, which really like builds confidence for buyers and folks that are looking to like purchase credits under these methodologies. And so, with that confidence really like comes scale. And so we're really proud of like that work that we've done to continue engagement. And I think another important thing to think about is like this space of carbon accounting is dynamic and things are improving, all of the time. And so we do really value that continued engagement because it only helps to kind of like strengthen the protocols, but also helps with overall implementation. So like that projects can be implemented quicker and with high quality.
Yeah, and I think that leads well to the next question around the labels. As you're continuing to get feedback and raise the standard that's been recognized by the core carbon principles. So several superpollutant methodologies have received these CCP or core carbon principles labels. What does that recognition say about the quality and rigor of these projects?
Yes, we're like incredibly proud of getting the CCP approval for 8 of our protocols, 7 of them which cover like superpollutants. And I think it really provides like a really strong signal to the market that these, types of projects, these credits that are coming from these projects are really high quality. And I think that really brings, confidence to the market. It's something that people can kind of rely on and show or see that there's a standard that these projects meet. And it really does deliver that confidence. I think another thing to note, particularly for like the reserves program, is that, we have other protocols that would kind of fit in this like super pollutant space, such as like methane destruction related to livestock operations and ozone depleting substances, destruction of those. And early on, these methodologies were recognized by the state of California for early action, which is kind of another signal to the market that these are like high quality. So it's great to have that additional recognition like on the voluntary side. But I think overall, when you look at like the big picture of the voluntary market and the compliance market and how they're viewing these types of projects, I think you can really see that these are high quality projects and they have kind of endorsements from different, stakeholders and standards and regulators, which I think is really key and really will help to scale these types of activities.
So it gives both buyers comfort in the quality, the methodology, and potentially other regulators, other governments who are considering, adding more methodologies to their compliance programs.
Yes, exactly.
So, building on that, so CAR worked closely with regulators and policymakers, as you mentioned. What are you hearing from government stakeholders regarding superpollutant reduction opportunities?
Yeah, so I think, one key component of like the reserves program and how we like address our protocols and our development is, like I mentioned before, we do really value this engagement with, policymakers, stakeholders, government entities to make sure that like our methodologies actually, represent kind of that jurisdictional context and kind of the priorities of that particular area, sector, or jurisdiction. But I think, so we do a lot of engagement there. And I think like what we're hearing is, like a lot of, even on the private sector, where are the opportunities to like accelerate climate action now? And I think
there's opportunities in this super pollutant space where it's like there's proven technology, proven methodologies, where we can really take action now as we're thinking about how do we continue to scale maybe like the more longer term like mitigation actions. And I think governments are really keen to, drive climate action, really think about how they can, move forward their agendas. And I think the super pollutant space is like a prime opportunity for them to really have impact now and really deliver near-term benefits on the climate, but also maybe on like the co-benefit side as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So Climate Action Reserve has helped expand super pollutant projects beyond North America. What opportunities are you seeing internationally?
There is, tremendous opportunity internationally. We have primarily been focused on, North America. But I think when we kind of like look at the sectors that our protocols are in, a lot of those sectors exist in other jurisdictions. So we're talking about, maybe waste management or, production of, nitric acid or dipic acid. These activities exist in other countries. So I think for the reserve, we've always thought about, again, how do we scale impact? And how do we like replicate what we've done really well in North America to really drive that benefit elsewhere? And so because we know there's these opportunities, we've been thinking about that a lot. And I think one area and change that we've recently made to the program is like how we are actually like addressing our protocol development process. And what we've done is we're taking a modular approach to the development of our protocols. And what that means is we have our protocol that has like the quantification rules, right? Because I think what we're finding is even when you look at other jurisdictions, the technology for the mitigation is going to be very similar. A lot of the quantification, that base information is going to be the same. What's different is the kind of the jurisdictional context. What does the regulatory environment look like? Maybe what are the practices for implementing that technology in a particular jurisdiction might be slightly different. And maybe like stakeholder priorities might be different. And so when we're thinking about how we kind of scale our work, we've decided to have modules for these jurisdictions. So it's kind of applying that main protocol, the main quantification, and then we have the modular piece where we can really assess that activity in that jurisdiction. And that's really important to get at like environmental integrity and make sure that it is high quality. But the advantage of this, and we're talking about scalability, is that we're not having to kind of recreate the wheel every time we want to go into a new jurisdiction. It allows us to develop protocols a lot quicker while maintaining that high environmental integrity so that we can get these activities into other jurisdictions and again, like really scale that impact.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think that regulatory framework of the jurisdiction helps you demonstrate or the developer demonstrate that it's beyond the regulatory requirements in that specific jurisdiction. Yeah, for that additionality piece. So, we often hear about growing emissions in countries like China and India. How important will international collaboration be in scaling super pollutant reductions globally?
No, it really is critically important that we really think about this as like globally. And we know that in other jurisdictions that, emission reduction or emissions are growing. And so I think
we need to be part of that solution to kind of support the mitigation there. And so that's something that, again, the reserve is looking at, because it's like, where are the high impact areas for, mitigation and for climate action? And so we are particularly interested in these, expanding our footprint out of North America. And so we've started to do a lot of work, particularly in Asia. We do have a adipic acid production protocol that is specific to China. We are currently working on a nitric acid production protocol in India, and we'll be expanding that more broadly in Asia as well. And so I think the reserve really does see that there's a lot of opportunities globally. And I think with our new modular approach, we're able to kind of take what we've done, all of the lessons learned, and kind of apply them to other jurisdictions to get these activities implemented quickly, so we can really see that action and impact.
Yeah. I like the scale. I like the expansion, the modular approach, and clearly your work is being recognized with CCP labels and other regulatory bodies using reserve methodologies for their compliance markets. So I thank you, Kristen, for sharing these perspectives. I just have one last question for you. What's one thing you'd like business leaders, policymakers, and sustainability professionals better understand about the opportunity in front of us?
Right. I think more recently there's been like a lot of discussion and momentum around, carbon removals, which I think is really exciting and essential to like mitigating and taking action on climate. But I also think we need to really be focused on what opportunities are like in front of us now, where we can have an immediate near-term impact. And I think when we're thinking about superpollutants, that provides us that opportunity. I think there's a huge opportunity there. And at the end of the day, we really need climate action that is ambitious and credible. And so taking on these types of project activities really lets us achieve that. And we can move quickly. And we really do need to act with urgency. And when we implement these types of activities, it's going to allow us to kind of move at the speed and scale that we really need to have an impact and really address this problem.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kristen.
Thank you so much for having me.